Hello everybody and welcome to another top 10 board gaming video. Today's topic is all about the most influential games of the 2010s. So over the last decade, as you all know, there have been hundreds of new board games released, and I thought it would be kind of fun to go over the ones that I felt were really the most influential in terms of bringing up new mechanics, looking at new ways of thinking about board games, how we interact with board games, and all of that kind of stuff. That said, there are a lot of different ways to interpret this. Like I said, for me personally, I like the idea of games that were sort of the seminal, the first ones to do something or to do something differently that was then copied over, or a new way of looking at board gaming in general. I'm curious, what do you guys think about it? What would you consider to be an influential game and why? Please let me know anything and everything that you all think in the comments below. With that though, we got to get started because we got a bunch to go through. We're going to dive right in with my number 10. At number 10, I've got Evolution. I have two major things to say about this. First off, it's on the list because it's all about science. Secondly, it's low on the list because it wasn't the first major one that's about science. I really credit Evolution with doing a lot to making science more accessible and viable as a board game theme. Since this, we have seen a lot of other games and even entire companies that are entirely based around science-centric board games, and I absolutely love it. In addition, North Star Games themselves have released expansions as well as modified versions like Oceans and all of this kind of stuff. It's absolutely an incredible game. Evolution, my number 10. At number 9, I've got Dead of Winter. This is a game that did quite a bit towards bringing a more unique narrative storytelling style with the crossroads mechanic. Now, obviously, Plaid Hat Games is the only company that can use it because it's their thing, but at the same time, I really love that they took a chance with it because it had never been done before. They didn't know if it would work, and it was a huge hit. But that said, that's why it's so low on the list, because obviously we can only see it from them, but having that such unique mechanic about the crossroads and not knowing if your next action is going to trigger something is an incredible feeling at the table, not to mention the overall idea of the game of the semi-cooperative aspect with the potential betrayer and all of that kind of thing. Dead of Winter, my number 9. At number 8, I've got Legends of Andor. In addition to the absolutely ridiculous number of awards and nominations this game got, including one of the, if not the first Kennerspiel des Jahres award, this game really did a lot to bring us this sort of adventure scenario-based play structure that we see in a lot of other games. Now, granted, we did have that before. It was certainly around. We had games that utilized scenarios and all of that kind of stuff. But Legend of Andor really brought it to another level. We have great scenarios, wonderful writing, interesting characters. We've got characters that progress as you go through the stories. You have incredible expansions that are associated, lots and lots and lots of wonderful things. But the fact is, it's a little bit lower on the list because it improved on a lot of stuff that was already there, but it is still absolutely wonderful. Legends of Andor, my number 8. At number 7, I've got Kingdom Death Monster. This is a relatively unique one on my list because it's not about the game itself, but rather about how the game came about. This was a massive Kickstarter campaign that took years to fulfill things that were promised within months or maybe a year. And so it soured a lot of community members against using Kickstarter to try and get new games. In addition, this really started this massive craze to have miniatures. Everything needs miniatures. They have to be great. They have to be sculpted amazingly, and they have to be perfect in all of this. And in my opinion, this really started a lot of people looking more at the aesthetic of games rather than the actual gameplay. It's not bad, but if all you care about are getting cool looking miniatures, then you can go to Games Workshop and look at Warhammer 40k stuff. There is a ton of great stuff there. That said, I think a lot of the community has sort of come back to Kickstarter. We see a lot of companies that are really good about fulfilling deadlines and all of that kind of stuff, but still that sort of cloud of Kingdom Death Monster hangs over us just a little bit, and so it is still my number 7. I bet you all can't guess that number 6 is Gloom Haven. So this is another sort of Kickstarter story where effectively this game had a massive funding round, first and second printing, and that's part of why it's on this list, because it was one of the first ones that had a massive reprint as well. But on top of that, this game combines a lot of wonderful aspects relatively smoothly. You've got scenarios, you've got solo play, you've got dungeon crawling, you've got character advancement, you've got all sorts of different stuff going on here. And the thing is, more and more we are seeing these bigger, badder, more complicated games. And I think in part it's because of Gloom Haven, because it shot up to number 1 on the Board Game Geek ranks. That said, it's lower on the list because it came out relatively recently, and so it hasn't had a whole lot of time to influence other things. And as a quick side note as well, the same creator of Gloom Haven and the same company just recently finished a Kickstarter for Frosthaven, which has become the most funded board game on Kickstarter in history, which is absolutely insane. But regardless, Gloom Haven is my number 6. At number 5, I've got Lord of the Rings, the card game. This is a living card game from Fantasy Flight that was released pretty early in the decade, which is why it's on this list. And essentially, Fantasy Flight kind of used this as a jumping off point for a lot of other intellectual property. Not only does Fantasy Flight own Lord of the Rings as far as board games are concerned, but they also have Star Wars, Game of Thrones, XCOM, all sorts of different stuff. And a lot of these things came out with this style living card game, 1 versus 1 combat systems. We have Android Netrunner, we have the Arkham Horror card game, we've got the Game of Thrones card game, whole bunch of different stuff like that. And the fact is that they are all very well designed and a ton of fun. And I think it's great because it has a nice balance between a strategic board game and a collectible card game like Magic the Gathering. I've warmed up a lot to these living card games. I still don't really like collectible card games, but the living card games, much better, as long as they don't go too ridiculous with the expansions like they've done with Legend of the Five Rings. But either way, Lord of the Rings, the card game, my number 5. At number 4, I have Vast, in this case Crystal Caverns. So I know that this is not the inciting game for this particular thing, but I love how Vast Crystal Caverns implemented asymmetric gameplay, where every player at the table is playing as a distinct character with unique abilities, goals, looks, all of that kind of stuff, including somebody playing as the actual caverns themselves. Now, beyond this, we have seen Vast, I believe Maniac Mansions is one that was recently kickstarted, and then we also have Root, Everdell, and a few other games that have leveraged this idea of fully asymmetric gameplay. This substantially increases the replayability, and in addition, it creates a lot of really unique interactions as people are playing through, because everybody is doing something completely unique. Whereas with most games that are competitive, everybody is trying to do the same thing, but potentially in a different way. Whereas in these cases, everybody is literally doing something completely different. I absolutely love it, and I hope to see more games like it. Vast, my number 4. At number 3, I've got Time Stories. This really introduced us to a very unique means of narrative storytelling within board games. I love the art, I love the way that the story is presented, I love how the expansions have unique themes amongst them, but the overarching storyline between the base game as well as all of the other expansions is still maintained. And the fact is that this is, at least in my experience, the first one that really did narrative storytelling in this truly fun, unique, and different way. Again, we've had a lot of games that do storytelling, a lot of games that do narrative storytelling, scenario-based storytelling, all of that kind of stuff. But this one, it just has something so different about it. It made it feel a lot more like a tabletop RPG. You see things unfold. You've got unique puzzles that you're trying to solve. You're just going through all of these incredible motions where you feel like you are these characters and you have these particular missions that you are trying to accomplish as quickly and efficiently as possible. It's an absolutely amazing experience. Time Stories, my number 3. At At number 2, I've got Seven Wonders Duel. Now, to my recollection, this is the first time a game that was taken from a larger scale, in this case Seven Wonders, was boiled down to a 2-player exclusive version that had met with extremely massive critical and commercial success. For me personally, it took me a while to warm up to it, but now I absolutely love it. And the duel format has become kind of standard across a lot of games now, and it's something that a bunch of companies are actively trying to do with their old properties. So we've seen it with Tesla versus Edison, where we've got the duel version. We've seen it with Caverna, where we have 2 caves or something along those lines. And we've even seen it with my favorite game of all time, Cosmic Encounter. So I really like the idea of having the same kind of feel of a game in a boiled down version for 2 people, because a lot of these games you can't play well with 2 people. A lot of times you have to have some kind of an AI system or something like that, and it just doesn't feel quite right. So doing this dual system and having this kind of boiled down version of games is absolutely amazing. It has been tremendously influential on a lot of other games, companies, etc., and it is my number 2. As you probably expected, I have a decent number of honorable mentions I wanted to run through really quickly. First off, Battle Lore. The first version was released before the decade started, with the second one afterwards, so it's kind of in the middle there. But essentially, this is a great skirmish game that balances nicely between the heavy tactics as well as the ability to start playing it. So it brought in a lot of new people into the genre. Next up, Pandemic. Again, released before the decade started, as was the expansion On the Brink, but the fact is that this brought a lot more people overall into hobby gaming. It brought people into cooperative gaming overall. It brought scientific theming into board gaming. And in addition, it survived long enough to see it kind of peter out as we saw a bunch of spin-off games that got kind of frustrating. Next up that I wanted to talk about was Blood Rage. So this is another of these Kickstarter games that was super crazy popular. It sort of had a flash in the pan type of thing where everybody played nothing but Blood Rage for a long time, and then everybody just sort of stopped. It's not a bad game, but it's also not a super great game. So I find it to be influential because it was a massive Kickstarter success. Everybody was liking it, sharing it, and all that kind of thing, but then it just kind of sort of died off. Next up is King of Tokyo. Similarly to Pandemic, this did a lot to bring new people into hobby gaming in general. King of Tokyo is a very simple game that is extremely easy to learn, but it's still a ton of fun, and you have a significant, surprising amount of strategy associated with it, particularly when you consider that the rules are essentially one page front and back and nothing else. Last but not least, I wanted to talk about Marvel Legendary. This is certainly not the first deck builder, but it is one that did a great job of incorporating an intellectual property into a board game context. In this case, making the Marvel heroes into a deck builder where you could fight against the famous bad guys of the Marvel Universe in a cooperative format. Again, having this cooperative idea being something that was relatively unique, particularly for deck builders at the time. But with all of that, we're going to jump right into my number 1. At number 1, I've got Pandemic Legacy. This is a game that truly took the gaming world by storm, almost immediately taking the number 1 spot on Board Game Geek's ranking list. And the fact is that it gives us sort of a power fantasy as board gamers that we don't ordinarily see. And that is a shifting, changing, permanently altered world that we are affecting. We can see something happening because of an action that we take. And not only that, but we see it next time we play, and the next time, and the next, and the next. It gives you a concise story within a box that you can play through and feel like you're in kind of like a novel or in a D&D campaign or something like that. It tends to make gamers more attached to the game and hopefully encourages them to play it a little bit more. It takes the narrative storytelling beyond a lot of what we already saw, where you are actively altering what you can or can't do in a particular game. And that said, it has spawned a ridiculous number of other legacy games on its back. So we've got not only Pandemic Legacy Season 2, but a bunch of other games from a lot of other companies. And this fad is really here to stay. It is something that is fun. It's something that's it's enjoyable, but the fact is that Pandemic Legacy is the one that really started it, and that is my number one. Well, everybody, that's going to be it for me. I hope that you enjoyed this video on my top 10 most influential board games of the 2010s. This has been an absolute roller coaster of a decade when it has come to board game releases, and of course we have hundreds of options. That said, as I mentioned before, I have my own personal definition of what makes a game influential, which could be primarily, in my view, mechanical or overall impact on the community as a whole, or things of that nature. Of course, you guys would probably have your own opinions, and as always, I need to hear it. Put it in the comments below. What are your favorites? What are your influential games, and why? I would love to have some awesome conversations about it all. But that said, if you haven't done so already, please take a look at my social media pages where you can interact with myself and my channel in a bunch of really fun ways. But with that, thank you so much again for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.